Welcome everyone. My name's Sarah Lethbridge. I'm the Pro Dean of External Engagement for Cardiff Business School. My role is to help the school to be as open and involving with external audiences as possible. So every month we run breakfast briefings designed to share the work of the school and the work of some of our friends. So really great to welcome you today to this breakfast briefing about the business of law, operations, investments and ethics. Whoa. Got a lot to cover there. And we've got a long tradition of working with law firms in the business school. We've delivered leadership programs for Acuity, for Hugh James, because, of course, law firms are, and we're going to hear more about this, big businesses. So that was also my other law firms are available announcement for all the people about to hear about a history of also about capital law, where our founder and managing partner Chris Nott is from. So thanks for coming and let's have a good session. In terms of all of the logistics, speech to text captioning is available for this event, particularly for those watching at home. In terms of upcoming events, I know we talk about it a lot, but it's such a fantastically funded programme from UK government, our Help to Grow programme. You get different sessions with all different academics. I teach one of them, guys. I teach vision, mission and values, and you get mentoring, you get one-to-one support. So if you're an SME that really is looking to grow to the next phase, do get in touch because it's such a fantastic programme that's, I think, 95% funded by the UK government. Our next breakfast briefing is going to be on the 23rd of May, looking at social prescribing. So all of the innovative ways that we can move more into a health prevention space, not just dealing with all of the unhealthiness and all the illness that happens when we don't look after our wellness. So that should be really interesting. And really pleased that the Minister in charge of mental health, Lynn Neagle, is going to be introducing the work that Welsh Government's doing in that area. Got a spring cohort of our Lean Six Sigma programme with the wonderful Professor Manish Kumar, really popular programme. So do sign up if you want to learn everything about improvement. So that's my area of expertise as well. Everyone needs to know about improvement. It's the law. So yeah, it's a really good programme. And yeah, there's the contact details for the Help to Grow programme. So if you haven't yet signed up to our community, we'd urge you to sign up to our community because we'll share all of the information and events that the business school offers. We try not to bother you too much, and we're also trying to get more sophisticated about our database and only start tailoring information to the things that you might be interested in. We're not 100% there yet, but we're on the journey to getting a bit more sophisticated about how we target different groups of people in terms of what they're interested in. This event is going to be recorded online. Please talk in the chat. You can be as chatty as you like, but keep your microphones on silent, please, because you'll come booming into the room otherwise. And you don't want to do that and embarrass yourself because your screen will go yellow. So yeah, have a good chat there online. And Harrod's in the background sorting out our online community. And one final note from me, if anyone has parked and hasn't given their registration number to us, please do find one of us to give your registration number. It's actually making things a bit easier for us, but we do need to know who is coming on campus so that we can make sure that we pay for your parking, okay? Otherwise, you might get a nasty letter in a couple of weeks' time with a fee surprise from Cardiff University and our parking partners, Group Nexus. So thank you so much. And now I love it when I can just hand over to an esteemed academic such as Professor Leighton Andrews to chair and organise the rest of the event. So thanks so much both.
Okay. Well, Borodar Athro, welcome to Cardiff Business School. I'm very pleased indeed this morning that we have as our guest speaker, Chris Nott, founding partner of Capital Law, as Sarah said. I don't have a lot to do this morning, apart from to start off by saying what I think Chris is going to talk about is very much in line with the public value ethos here at Cardiff Business School. We seek throughout our courses to develop in our students some understanding of the wider social, economic and environmental issues beyond the business economy and give that as a context for the work in which they're involved. And there are particular kinds of grand challenges that the world faces that will be very germane to what Chris has to say this morning, including issues such as decent work, good governance, responsible innovation. I'm sure will all come out of some of the themes in which he touches. Chris has had a long and distinguished career in the law. He started at Loosemores in Cardiff more years ago than he wants me to remember. He worked in the City of London. He then became a founding partner of Capital Law here in Cardiff, a company which has grown very significantly and operates not only in Wales, but beyond. He's also a bit of an entrepreneur on the side, working in the hospitality industry, but he can say a bit about that himself. And we have a shared interest in football, particularly Cardiff City Football Club. Other football clubs are available. And I know that Chris I slightly envy Chris that he was able to get out to Split to watch Wales play last weekend. And I'm told that there are very distinguished shots of the back of his head circulating in viral videos going around as Wales scored on Saturday evening. So, Chris, welcome. Over to you.
Well, Leighton, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you all for this opportunity to come and speak with you. This lecture is a very good example of how, if you go out and have lunch with a good friend who's a professor at Cardiff University, you shouldn't shout your mouth off about how you'd like the opportunity after 40 years to say a few words about the structure of your profession, which led to a phone call about a month later, and here I am. Just by way of context, so I'm not an academic, I'm a practicing lawyer, but I have been in the profession, but from kind of an odd perspective for some time, because I started off working in legal aid practice. I then went and worked in the city, liked the work, didn't so much like the environment, came back here. And in the law firms in the top 200, there are about 2 that are still led by their founders. So I kind of had this timely and unique perspective on the practice, which I talk about a lot. And when I got asked to come and do this talk, I immediately thought to myself, it's one thing for me to have an opinion. I now need some evidence behind it because I'm in an academic institution. So I just want to thank 4 of my colleagues, India, Becca, Evie, and Rhiannon, who over the last month or so helped me put together the evidence base to back up some of the opinions that I've held for quite some time. I'm also, just by way of context, just to emphasize, I'm going to talk about the business of law and what it's like as an economy from the inside, what it's like as an economy from the outside. I'm going to talk about some good things and some bad things. I'm not going to talk about the practice of law. And I'm also not going to talk, there are 2 branches to our profession, as solicitors and no barristers. I'm not going to talk about the barrister profession. I don't consider that to be a business. Although all the people who are self-employed, it's not an investable business, and therefore, no disrespect to it, I'm just not going to go into that particular area. So if I may try and work this. So I'm going to talk essentially about four things. I'm going to talk about the structure of the legal profession, the economy of law firms, micro and macro. I'm going to talk about the demise, legal aid cuts, the demise of high street law firms. I'm then going to talk a bit about ethics, why you might ask, you'll see. And then I'm going to make a series of observations. You've got to remember that the business of law, from an operational or an investment ethical perspective, could be the subject of entire academic courses in their own right. There's a PhD thesis in all of them or in bits of them. So I have to go super high level. And if you think I've missed something, ask me a question later. That's the only way I can deal with that. And I'm also not going to try, I'm going to try not to impose my own opinions on this. I'm going to try and give you a series of facts on which you can form your own opinions. And I just hope that they're the same as mine. Picking up on the football analogy that, and for reasons that become evident as well, I've called this a game of 2 halves. So let's just talk a bit about the structure of the legal profession. We've got 157,437 practicing solicitors. and there are 17,000 barristers. They break down into 1,188 partnerships, 5,169 companies, that's about 50% of the profession, 1,489 limited liability partnerships, and 1,671 sole practitioners. So I don't need to move on. Oh, yes, I do need to move on.
Do you want me to move the
No,
slides on here?
no, I'm fine.
Okay.
So you've got an odd series of legal operating models that work within that. This is a slide that sets out the structure of the legal profession very broadly. US and international firms and what are called magic circle firms, which are about 5 or 6, and those are largely very internationally operated. There's then an area beneath that called silver circle. Pretty much the turnover pretty much goes the biggest at the top and the smallest at the bottom, but that's not necessarily so. The magic circle have kind of a glitz and a glamour that win them work, and some would argue that's justified, and some would argue that's not justified. And then below the silver circle, you have national firms with offices all around the United Kingdom. You have multi-regional, so in 2 or 3 places. So Geldars, for example, based in Cardiff, or in Cardiff in the Midlands. You have regional firms that are only based here, not here, but only based in one particular location. And then you would have niche and boutique firms that specialize in very precise areas of law. For what it's worth, capital law sits somewhere between those two. We're both niche and boutique in that we only purely do commercial law. But we're very firmly based in a region, although we have a London office and a Paris office. And then you have sort of a little sad add-on at the bottom of High Street, but that's in terms of numbers of firms, that's actually where the majority of firms sit, although the majority of the economy doesn't sit in that particular place. In terms of revenue, the highest revenue from a UK-based law firm, which is DLA Piper, is 2.6 billion. You might think that's a lot. I'm going to argue in a moment it's not a lot. The top 200 law firms, which is where most of the business activity takes place, is quite a broad spread, in that the 200th firm, which is a firm called Lee & Thompson, turn over 12.4 million, which is not a big business. And we at Capital Law sit somewhere in the middle of that. The profession as a whole over the last 10, 20 years is a raging success story from an economic perspective. The profession has grown, it's grown 260% in turnover. It's now a £32 billion industry. There are loads of ways of measuring the turnover of the legal profession because some law firms sit within broader professional services. So you can get some numbers which say it's a 46 billion turnover. I use the lowest number. And 65% of law firms saw an increase in profit last year. It's an incredibly resilient industry that can thrive on the upturn and thrive on the downturn. Law firms loved COVID. They didn't know at the beginning because they all took the loans, but most of them gave them back. It's an industry that can thrive in a downturn as well as upturn. It's now recognized by the investment community as counter-cyclical and uncorrelated to financial markets. If you want to compare this to the FTSE 100, whoops, my slides are upside down. The largest firm in the FTSE 100, AstraZeneca, turn over 37 billion. Whilst they might sound like big businesses, 2.6 billion, one company in the FTSE 100 is bigger than the entire legal profession. And the smallest company in the FTSE 100, which when I looked for the purpose of these statistics, was the Frasers Group, turning over 4.67 billion. Last night it was reported that Next is now the 100th. At 4.6 billion turnover, its turnover is twice the size of the largest law firm based in the United Kingdom. So they sound like they're relatively large businesses, but they're actually not as big as it would first appear. This is how the profession breaks down. This is where my story takes a turn. So of that 32 billion, 2/3 of it, so those six, this is basically the types of legal work that are undertaken within law firms. So law firms might look like a holistic whole. Actually, they're made up of lots of micro businesses run in distinct specialisms. We take those headings at the bottom, so litigation, corporate, solvency and banking, employment, commercial property and planning, actually is a neat summary of what capital law does, because those are our areas. In terms of turnover, that's 2/3 of the turnover of the whole profession. And actually other at the top is actually business, it's niche areas of business law, not high street, not personal law. So it's 75% of the turnover of all the law firms in the UK are focused on commercial or corporate law. They're not focused on what I will call people law, that ordinary citizens in the United Kingdom would want. That's now really 25% of the work that we do. Now, back in the day, and that's the day when I started work, which is not that long ago, I started work in a legal aid practice. That was the heartbeat of the profession. So that law firm, which was headquartered on High Street, had something like 10 offices around Cardiff in the various communities that were operating there, providing services to those individual communities. When I get to talk about the larger law firms in a moment, one of the top 10 law firms in the UK actually started in those routes. That firm had a similar spread. That law firm that I started in has no offices in the regions of, in the suburbs of Cardiff, and all similar firms have all contracted, either ceased to exist or contracted back to a small base. So the legal economy, micro and macro. I'm going to start talking about the microeconomy first. So the microeconomy is how does the economy of a law firm work within that law firm? And then I'm going to talk about the relationship between all the law firms, how the market breaks up. The economy of a law firm is archaic in lots of ways and hasn't changed in the entire time I've been working in it. It is essentially based around a billable hour or a billable time. And every, Sarah's nervous I haven't moved on to the next slide. I'm not going to move on. I'm going to stick on this slide until I finished on my micro point. Either the work of a law firm is charged in terms of its time times its rate directly, or it's charged on a fixed price basis, but that price is determined internally against what people think will be the time and the rate. So every lawyer in the country, as far as I'm aware, records every 6 minutes of what they do, and they record that against a rate. And your economy builds up during the course of the day to the number of 6-minute units that each of the people working within that organization works, times the rate that you aspire to get for that person. And the more people that you have and the more 6-minute units that you can put out, the more that individual firm accumulates in terms of work in progress. And that leads directly into the amount of money they bill, which becomes their turnover and such like. It is therefore a people-based economy. Law firms have 60% of their outgoings, their cost base is the cost of the people that work within them. A heavily people-based organization. Now, from what I've just said, you may say that looks like a very, very simple and basic economic structure. The very few academics who've ever looked at the operation of the business of law will say that these are some of the most complicated and difficult businesses to operate that could ever be created, for the simple reason that that 60%, that's your cost base, or the people that are the engine of your business, are all extremely clever and are trained to argue and have an opinion on everything. And therefore, in terms of managing and operating a law firm, it's extremely complex business to work through. And I then think, so what you then end up creating is a pyramid structure within these firms, where you will have trainee solicitors and paralegals who then qualify to become solicitors, they become associates, they become senior associates, they become principal associates, they become promoted to become partner. They might be salaried at that level, and at some point will share in the overall profitability of the business. You end up with this profit structure. And within that, I'm now going to mention a word to you that many of you will never have heard of, but which will keep being repeated from now on in my talk. And it's a word called PEP. Who knows PEP? No arms in the room. PEP is profit per equity partner. If you look at the financial metrics that you would see in the FTSE 100, for example, or that you would see in other businesses sectors, which would be returns on capital or the share price or the like, the metric that most of the profession measure, and I say most of because we don't, but most of the profession measures themselves by is called profit per equity partner. And it is essentially it's the sum of the profit at the top divided by the number of partners within it. And the impact of that will become apparent as I move on to the more macro elements of what I'm going to talk about. So the macro side of the legal profession is illustrated by this slide, which is the headline financial metrics of the top 200 largest 20 law firms in the United Kingdom. Now, you being very clever, you will have added up all those turnover numbers very rapidly. And you will have identified that in those 20 firms is 50% of the turnover of the entire legal profession. On the left-hand side, in the top 10, is 1/3 of the turnover of the entire legal profession. So what's happened over the time that I've been in practice is the legal economy has moved from being one directed at providing legal services to people in communities to being one designed to provide legal services to essentially the business community. I say essentially because there's public law within this as well. But what I was provided as law to individuals, law to corporations. And on the right-hand side, you will have PEP numbers. Now, I'm going to make a point and tell you that those numbers are average, okay? So if you take Slaughter and May, which is number 1 in this table from a PEP perspective, they're demonstrating an average revenue, average profit per partner of 3.5 million, which means that there are some below that, and there are quite a lot that are more than that. And that takes me into one of the reasons why I call this a game of two halves, because the game of two halves is the law that's the business of law is provided to essentially the business community, not to individuals. But if you take a footballing analogy, within the Premiership, football being what people tend to think of as being the industry where people are most overpaid, wildly overpaid. If you take the Premiership, there are 20 clubs in the Premiership. They're each allowed to register as their playing squad 25 players. And through the work that I do a lot of legal work in football. I know that the base salary in the Premiership is about £1 million a year per player. There's very few people there who have less than that. And barring exceptions, that would take you up to about 5 million. There are people that are exceptions above that. So in there, do the simple maths, 20 times 25 is 500, getting that sort of number. Those are the top 5 law firms in the United Kingdom in terms of profitability. And in one of those firms is more than the entire profitability of the entire revenue of the Premiership. They're more than one of those, more than 500 partners. And in that instance, earning, I put 390, 427 there. It's not only one, just between the two, but you get my point, which is that within the top echelons of the legal profession are multiples of the revenue levels that you get within the Premiership, multiple times between multiple firms. I'm going to compare that with the Big Four accountancy practices. There's a very substantial difference between the structure of the accountancy profession and the structure of the legal profession. In the accountancy profession, you have, as you know, the Big Four, and then below that, there's a drop to 4 or 5 firms that have reasonable turnover and work nationally, and then loads of smaller firms. What you have in the legal profession, as you've seen, is a very, very different makeup. So the largest law firm, as I said, based in the UK, has a turnover around 2.5 billion. Each of the big 4 are all individually, just in the UK, bigger, if not substantially bigger than that law firm. They all sit above that because they're part of global organizations with revenues of 60 billion, 45 billion, 34 billion. So what the legal profession hasn't done is that mass consolidation. There has been consolidation. So a lot of the firms I talked earlier on, for example, Freshfields, that's the result of a merger. There has been some degree of consolidation, but there hasn't been consolidation in the same way there has been in the accountancy profession. Why is that? Well, their legal conflict is one of the reasons at the root of it. Another would be culture. There's a lot of work being done around the fact that each of these law firms, if you move from being a corporate finance lawyer from one law firm to another law firm, you're not just moving your desk and changing the view outside your window. They all operate in very individual and very distinctive ways. But I'm making the point that I think I made earlier, I touched on earlier, which is that although they sound like very, very large organizations, the law firms are not large organizations. But my final point on this slide is the one at the top, which is that all of these professional services firms are all moving into the legal market massively. They've all built substantial law firms in their own right, and 13% of law firms lost business to the Big Four in 2022. The stat I couldn't find, but I can talk about colloquially, is that all of those firms in the top are the targets for recruitment. The Big Four accountancy firms are hammering the larger law firms for staff and using their financial muscle to bring across entire teams to build their own practices. And when I get to speculating or observing later on about some of the things that might be happening in the profession, in your area particularly, the operational change that will get driven through the profession in a large extent is going to come from the impact of the professional services firms, I'm calling them, rather than accounting firms. They're not purely accounting firms. How the professional services firms are going to impact on the operation of the major law firms. So having that structure, you end up with this rather curious position, which is that since about 2006, the law permitted people who were not lawyers to become the owners of law firms. It was restricted prior to that point in time. But since that time, there have only been 6 pure IPOs, placements on the stock market, of law firms. There have been some that have been placed, like MJ Hudson, as part of a placing of a broader structured group. But the point's made by this slide that only 6 law firms have accessed capital markets for investment. And as you can see, so the graphs are, on the left-hand side is their listed price. Then you have, from last year, the price low, the price high, and then you've got the current share price on the right-hand side, which you can see it's not been a great success story. Gately's, so if I just put some color around this, because I think there's quite some interesting stories from the color. So Gately's is a firm based in the Midlands. It was the first to float. It's handled that extremely well. It's used its share capital to do consolidation. It's done 12 acquisitions of other businesses that are not law firms to build a more broadly based group. Ince is a business that was designed to consolidate failing law firms. It's now failed. It hasn't, I think its last accounts are now 3 months overdue. Its share price has got hammered. Broke the golden rule, which is if you have one really crap business and you buy another really crap business, to put them together, you end up with one very large crap business. Keystone's an interesting business. It's a new model, so it is essentially, they won't like me saying this, but it's essentially individual economy. So if I join that firm, I'd be an economy in my own right, sitting on an operational hub, which has got brand, regulatory, accounting, and I eat what I kill and give them a percentage. It's done that pretty well. RBG is a litigation firm that floated. It was only turning over 15 million, got a price of about 40 million on IPO. It's done 2 or 3 decent acquisitions, but one of its businesses, which is litigation, one of its businesses had a wobble, had to do a profits warning, and its share price just got hammered because these are, as is the way with small cap businesses, your price is very, very sensitive to market sentiment. Nott is a consolidator, so it was a private equity operation. It's a private equity operation that then floated and is buying up medium-sized firms all around the country. It had a bit of a profit warning. That it's good, its shares will bounce back. It's very well in business. DWF is the only one that's in the top 20, that graph I showed you earlier. But the moment it floated, it did a profits warning, and you see what happened. So very interesting that the investment market, that law firms haven't sought investment. Why? If you're the top 20 firms, those that you could call those cash points. I mean, if you've got a business that's generating £2 million a year equity profit per equity partner, what is the rationale for converting that into a salary and then making the rest of it profit that you can then sell to the investment market? There's been a lot of reticence about doing that. One firm called Mishcon de Rea, who are very big and very profitable, got very close to it, but then bottled out at the last minute quite recently. And then if you get into, I won't put a slide up for this, but if you look at private equity is virtually not invested in law firms. It's done about 4 that I know of, and they're all quite small niche plays. I have absolutely no doubt that soon the private equity players will come into the legal market in quite some way. Why? Well, their reticence is for 2 reasons. One is they don't like people businesses, and these are the ultimate people businesses. But the second is the lawyers' reluctance to trade as proper companies where they get paid a salary, have a sustainable profit that the private equity house can build in. But there are so many weaknesses behind the operation of law firms, because at the moment I'm telling you the good bit. This is a growing fast sector with high profitability that's very sustainable. Behind this, I'm going to get to in a moment, are a number of weaknesses that I think the private equity firms will think that they can cure. So I touched on this slightly, but whilst this has been going on, and the profession has essentially had a flight to money, a flight to growth, a flight to commercial law, the high street sector has been principally decimated. Now, by high street law, what I mean are people who do criminal law, housing, conveyancing, consumer law, wills and probate, childcare, mental health, divorce, not personal injury work. Personal injury practices are big law factories that take investment that sit in the top 200 in the main. There is some personal injury work done in high street firms, but the people that provide that sort of service are now only 25% of the profession, and are in the main microeconomies that don't provide anything like the level of remuneration to the day-to-day lawyers that you can provide in the larger commercial firms. So we end up with this situation. 6 million adults in England and Wales estimate to have an unmet legal need involving a dispute every year. The UK is ranked 79th in the world in terms of the accessibility and affordability of civil justice. I could bore you with 40 quotes that are quite similar to this. So that is just to say, I'm not going to take it. Don't worry about the detail of it. The only thing you need to see is that the top line is going down, but essentially I'm a bit colorblind in this range. I'm going to call that pink. Is the amount of money spent on criminal legal aid defending people who are being prosecuted, and the one above is the amount being spent on civil legal aid. And you can see that central funds, don't worry about that, but you can see that over that period of time since 2005, 2006, well, particularly it's really since 2010 that it's been a downward trend and a downward trend. And what sits behind that are savage cuts to the court and judicial system. I mean, savage cuts that the court system can barely operate at the moment in any meaningful way. I'm not going to make a political point, but something happened in 2010. I don't know what that was, Leighton. Can you remember?
Sadly.
And then if you look at this slide. Now, the first thing to notice on this slide is it's called not-for-profit civil legal aid providers, because what happened, it's been there for a while, but particularly since 2010, is when the practicing lawyers in practicing law firms moved from high street law into commercial law. So I've demonstrated what happened. The public need was met by not-for-profit providers like law centres or citizen advice bureaus or such like. And a lot of those were publicly funded. But you can see that since 2010, what happened in 2010, Leighton? I can't remember. But since 2010, the number of not-for-profit civil legal aid providers has simply plummeted. And I've got some quotes I can give you here. At a law centre where I do voluntary work, demand for legal services is greater than ever. However, there's insufficient funding to cover the cost of all the paid advisors who be needed. Next one, legal aid's been on a slippery slope for the last 10 years. The returns are ever diminishing, and there's only so long lawyers will put up with doing such work. I could give you 40, 50, 60 quotes that all say pretty much the same thing. So in this game of two halves, to mix my cliches, that's the other side of the coin. So I said I'd touch on the question of ethics. I'm going to do it in three ways, if I can. Conflict of interest, well, two ways. One is an extra repeat quote. So I'm going to rattle on, so there's time for questions. So one is conflict of interest, one is the code of conduct, and the one is the SRA principles. Inherent within the business model that operates with all commercial law firms is an unrelenting conflict of interest, because in virtually all of the projects that are undertaken in commercial law, the lawyer is both the person that diagnoses the problem, decides what the medicine is, and then provides the medicine and charges their price for it. If you're talking about a litigation case, do you need 4 witnesses or 8 witnesses? Do you need 3 lawyers on it or 8 lawyers on it? The lawyer will determine what that is, and then the lawyer will charge you for doing that. It's an inherent conflict of interest. It happens in all areas of the profession, and it creates a tension that the moment is leading to and driving very, very bad behaviors. And of course, we are all bound by a code of conduct which says you do not lose your position by taking unfair advantage of clients, and you must act with honesty, integrity, in the best interest of each client in a way that upholds public trust and confidence in the solicitor's profession and legal services. Now, our regulators, who are really working very hard to move standards up in the profession, and we act for our regulator, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, understandably take the view that it's not for them to interfere into the relationship that there is between client and lawyer. Clients can hire the lawyers they want, they can pay them what they want. But there is an increasing body of evidence that tension is leading to bad behaviors that might give rise to a particular problem. 10 years ago, Lord Neuberger, who was the president of the Supreme Court, made a speech about this, and I'm not going to read from it all, but what he said was, the legal system has an overriding duty to ensure that legal advice and litigation are cheap and speedy as is consistent with justice. What a service provider charges a client should not normally be interfered with by the state, but there's a public interest in keeping the charge as low as possible. Now, you might take the view that where you've got so many law firms, because I said there's not been the consolidation, there's been the accountancy firms, where you've got so many law firms, you almost have a perfect economy. You know, you should have perfect competition. In fact, what you have is the exact opposite of it, because the acquisition of legal services, now, whilst in some areas, for example, particularly in the public sector, there's very good procurement, very good negotiation, very good panel creation, in the way in which individual legal projects are procured and scoped, there are natural ties to particular law firms, which mean that competition breaks down. And Lord Neuberger, later on in his speech, makes the observation that it seems very odd that all the major law firms in the UK broadly all charge exactly the same rates, all of which lead to what I would call super profits. And that is illustrative of the system being broadly anti-competitive. So I put some war stories up here. Now, these are not, to my profession, flattering, but they are a few of the these are few of the manifestations of what I think is this inherent conflict of interest I'm talking about. At the moment, there's a trial going on involving a law firm called Deckard, where one of their partners, who they hired, scoped a project for £180,000 worth of work over a 2-year period and billed 18 million in much the same period. He was being sued for deliberately inflating the bill effectively, and the trial's going on at the moment to determine the consequences of this. But there are quotes after quotes, falsely and systematically exaggerated claims, city law firm partner struck off for exaggerated billings, law firm Mishcon faces UK trial, sisters called this on. There's story after story after story after this. And one may wonder whether that derives from the fact that this need to maintain PEP at the very high levels, because what happens is there's a fight for senior lawyers. Lawyers are transferring from a low firm PEP to high firm PEP. It's a game of two halves. It's like the football market. So I'm going to make some observations on this. And I'm going to put up this stat, is 92% of lawyers have experienced stress or burnout as a direct result of their job, compared to 50% of accountants. I'm not holding that up as a badge of honor or a benchmark, by the way. So we have this system that is, I could describe as successful and profitable and internationally well-known and famous, has within it two major problems. The first is it leads to conflicts that over the manner in which work is scoped and billed, and it leads to incredible pressure on the junior people working within organizations in order to produce the billing revenues that are needed. I've got millions of anecdotes I could tell around this. My favorite one is this. A trainee lawyer in one of London's big firms said he was so overworked that on one occasion he didn't leave the office for 3 days. When he and his colleagues slept under their desks, they were told to place their phones on their chests so the vibrations could wake them if anyone called. Legal Cheek Research, which is an observing magazine, observing online website, did a survey, and the average finish time at the top law firms across the UK was 11 minutes past 11. In a survey, Lawcare said 28% of participants either agreed or strongly agreed their work required them to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's a quarter of the profession felt they were on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 65% checked their emails out of work. So 2/3 checked their emails all the time, and only 48% of the managers in the profession had received leadership managing or supervising training. So what does this mean for I'm going to skip that slide. My time's tight and I've made the point. Oh, I'm missing a slide. I'll leave that up for a moment. So my final slide is, what does that mean for the future? Well, I'm going to talk about two things. One is people and one is research and development. On the people front, I think the future's actually bright, even though I think at the moment it's pretty crappy. And I think it's bright because the generational changes that are happening in society will naturally lead to the demand for different methods of operating. There will be people who will consider that it's a good business model to meet that demand. I'm not calling that an advert for us, but that's an advert for us. Our business model is designed to break this cycle. Secondly, you'll get a new generation of leaders coming in. One of the top law firms in that top 200 list is actually rooted in Cardiff. It's a firm called Evershed Sutherland. And some of you will know Catherine Roberts, who was the president of CBI in Wales until recently. And Catherine has just been made global chairman of Evershed, running the business national. I think it's number 6 in the UK in terms of turnover. And people like that who have a very caring, modern approach to the running of businesses. So I wrote, interestingly, I wrote to loads of my competitors and said, I'm doing this talk today. Can you tell me something about what the future might hold for you so I can report on it? And most of them either didn't reply or said, mind your own business. But Catherine did. Kath wrote to me and said, she pointed to me, she said, since I've been chairman, we've put up a responsible business microsite. In May 22, we submitted our first communication on progress, the UK Global Compact, first major law firm to receive accreditation by the Good Business Charter, and we've been a founding member of the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance. So what you're seeing is, as is often the way in economies, when problems arise, solutions naturally arise and driven by the people that are involved in it. And when you get to research and development, the profession as a whole is pretty terrible at that. 1% of revenues goes into research and development compared to 5% as an average across all other sectors. And one of the reasons for that, well, not for me to speculate what the reasons for that is, I'm reporting the facts to you, you can form your own view about what that is that these are not major businesses. So, and these are not businesses that need to drive change in order to drive profitability. And in a survey, a third of all lawyers surveyed said they couldn't see how this research and development would impact on them. But research and development is happening. Allen and Overy, one of the Magic Circle firms, recently launched Harvey, which is a ChatGPT-based AI system, which just came in the top 10% in cohort in the US bar exams. That's the chatbot did. And they've launched that particular tool. And the profession is divided into technology that helps us do what we do and technology that will replace us. And the common view is that technology will never replace us. And that must be wrong.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. Well, we've had a fascinating insight into the political economy of law in the UK principally, and the switch that there has been towards corporate welfare, as we might call it, away from social justice. I'm sure this is going to inspire lots of questions, so we've got about 15 minutes for your questions, and we'll be taking questions from those who are online as well as from people who are in the room. Can those in the room stick their hands up? Can those online do the virtual equivalent, please? Thanks very much indeed. I'll take Dylan first in the front row here, one of my colleagues.
Thanks very much, Chris. I'd just like to perhaps ask you to elaborate a bit more on your last comment there about ChatGPT. So digital technologies, as we know, are sort of taken over, well, being adopted by businesses across all different sectors. The legal sector, though, is, I guess, historically known to have sort of a focus around hard copy documents and things like that. Do these technologies like AI offer opportunities or threats to a sector like we have here in Wales?
Well, I don't know that we do have a sector here in Wales. I'll come back to that. It's clearly opportunities. Where I can only speak from my own perspective, which is that we're no longer a paper-based environment, or we've all moved on from that. I mentioned then that the technology in the legal profession is divided into two halves. It's that which is designed to help us do our job better, and there's that which is designed to replace us. That designed to replace us is not really off the starting blocks, but that designed to help us is really well advanced. So there are, but all of these applications have come from outside the profession, from providers to the profession. Very few of them have been created in the profession. So very few law firms that I know of have created their own technology to assist them, to give them a market advantage. We will wait, let providers provide a tool. So for example, document management systems, everything is super sophisticated online, research tools, financial accounting tools, the whole lot. It's all pretty well advanced. But the use of AI in its purest sense is quite limited in my experience. I think that will develop. But the interesting debate is, would you hire a chatbot to represent you in court? Would you hire a chatbot to negotiate an agreement? You might have one helping the woman negotiating the agreement for you, but you might not have them negotiating.
Okay, other questions? We've got
questions
any
online.
Yep.
I think Robert was first off the blocks. Robert Chapman, if you want to unmute yourself, thank you.
So, good morning. Good morning, Chris. Fascinating presentation. By the way, I like the football reference as someone who played for the Welsh Schoolboys alongside Ian Rush. Anyway, Chris, I don't know whether this question makes sense to you, but let me pose it. Do we not have a paradox at the moment? At a time when we need more access to the law, e.g. climate justice, erosion of civil rights, etc., access to justice is increasingly hindered, as per one of your slides. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's an interesting new type of law firm that's growing up at the moment, designed to tackle that kind of thing. One example would be the Good Law Project. One example would be Client Earth. Mm-hmm. And these are law firms. I can't tell you whether they're not-for-profit or charitable organizations. I think they're essentially not-for-profit, which are designed to target particular sociological issues of our time. Business model I know of, one of them is that if you win litigation, the other side has to pay your legal fees. So how they get themselves paid is by suing governments over failing to comply with their statutory obligations, winning the case, government has to pay their legal costs. So they change the law and get paid at the same time. They probably hate me putting it that way, but that's a simplistic way of doing it. So that strain is growing, Robert, yes. They're not businesses as businesses that could take investment, as far as I can see, although you can see why caring entrepreneurs or caring high net worth people with money to invest might want to support those projects.
A question at the back here.
Thank you very much, Chris. The problem of access to legal service is coupled by another problem of accessing the profession itself. So the introduction of the freelance solicitor thingy by the SRA now, can it solve this problem of access to legal service and access to profession, and how this like insurance industry can react to that? I think there is a problem with that. I don't know whether this question is relevant to you or not. Thank you.
Well, there are a couple of questions in there. So I'm going to take the one that you put about the Solicitors Regulatory Authority. I think that there's one can see some of the ethical challenges here, and that they might consider that's an area they can get into dealing with. I don't think that they are. I can't see how they can themselves deal with the issue of access to justice, because the challenge at the moment is that the economies, the lawyers who have to provide those services are being drawn away into other areas of work in the main. And there is potential for technology to provide solutions in that area, but as I said, it's only part of the solution. One issue is what is the law? The bigger issue is what do I do next? How do I deal with that? And the technology can do the first bit, the technology can't do the second bit. I'm sad to say that I think that this is a governmental issue. It's a social justice issue. You know, if half of our economy sits in the public sector, where do you put that money? Well, people always say, well, you'll put it to the NHS before you put it into the legal system. But there's a moment at which that's wrong, and that my own view is that balance has to be readjusted.
Got another question online for you, Chris, from Pip. And unmute yourself, Pip.
Good morning, all. Good morning, Chris. And thank you for the interesting insights this morning. I work within the legal profession myself in learning and development, and I'm really interested in your views on the increase of routes into the profession. So I know that law graduates were at a record high last year, and we've now got the solicitors qualifying exam entrance route. What impact do you think that's going to have on the profession?
I think it's going to have an impact on the problem that I've identified, which is the number of lawyers that there are willing to provide advice or able to provide advice to in people law. So that's a positive with that. My challenge with what I call it, the liberalization of the method by which we can enter the profession, is actually this profession is quite hard. It's difficult, it's hard work, not just physically. I mean, it is physically hard work. I mean, literally physically hard work. But a lot of what we do is really complicated. It's really difficult. And, you know, if you get a place in our firm and you make it, you're good. Because the moment someone arrives who's not got that intellectual firepower that you need to do this stuff, they stand out. And you have to deal with it. So, you know, the sifts that we have to go through to make sure that everybody is of the right caliber, and we are, you know, in the top 200, we're probably about 150, but you know, throughout the profession. So you take areas like childcare law, or you take areas like housing law. They're really complicated, difficult areas of the law, and the idea that, you know, people who can't cut it in other areas are therefore working in this area is not a great place to be. So I'm absolutely for the liberalization profession. I think the idea of legal apprenticeships is utterly brilliant. I think the SQE is really fantastic. And we've got, you know, colleagues in our firm who've now going through that system. But I just make that caveat, which is that with liberalisation comes a potential for reduction of standards.
Thank you.
Can people who are online, can we just check that you are muted when you're not asking a question, please?
So Chris, I'm a barrister and an in-house lawyer, and I work in the public sector. So
I feel like a goat tethered to a stake at this point.
But I'm not of this world, I suppose, but I interact with it. And for me, the way of reacting to the price of accessing the legal profession, I suppose, is to grow my own, is to increase my in-house legal department. But the money, the stats and stuff that you throw earlier suggests that's probably not the case, because the business is being generated somewhere. So do you have an observation on where the in-house world is going in the corporate space? But also, if the likes of the Big Four are growing their legal provision, are similarly sized companies and AstraZeneca, for example, not going down the route of looking to grow their in-house capability as well? Did you see a pattern?
Well, you'll know that the sort of that the pattern over many years has been, these lawyers are all too expensive. We've got to grow our teams, grow the teams. We haven't got the breadth of expertise within our team. We need to go to external lawyers. The external lawyers are too expensive. We'll grow our team. And that balance is a really difficult one. And the trick is striking it correctly. I mean, my colleagues at the moment are involved in some litigation with where the other side are have the in-house lawyer running it. And he might as well have one of his arms tied behind his back. Bless him. I hope he's watching. Because it is that difficulty between knowing being part of the organization, caring about it, and the cost is the salary cost, not the market salary cost, and getting the right expertise. The real, not teaching your own job, the real skill, in my view, is in procurement. It's in knowing where to get the right skill and how to price it properly. I remember a client of mine who was a GC in a big bank, said that if we had a litigation case in, they'd get a law firm to try and sort it, to advise on it and try and sort it out. But they would know that if it went to litigation, they wouldn't be doing it. They wouldn't they wouldn't scope their own project. So they knew if they didn't sort it out, they'd lose the job. I thought that was brilliant. So, but there's methodologies, there's tricks by which you get the best out of your external lawyers. It's a skill.
Okay, any more online before I take a couple in the room?
We're running tight for time.
Yeah.
We do have a couple more questions online. Jason's had his hand up for a little while. Jason, if you want to unmute yourself, maybe we'll take one question.
And I've got two in the room as well.
Hi there, Chris. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting. I have a comment and a question, if you don't mind. Firstly, I'm a partner in a high street legal aid practice firm, and I specialise in childcare work, and that's my bread and butter. The comment I wish to make is that you've mentioned that junior staff are spending days at a time in office in big firms and finishing late in the evening. And surely that is the kind of practice that facilitates the partners of those top firms taking home seven-figure salaries. Now, we have a recent and ongoing missive and message from the president of the family division with an emphasis on staff welfare. But surely it seems that staff welfare is the poor relation when it comes to partners' consideration of their individual profits. So that's one thing that firms need or we should think about taking away from that. The question is this. You've mentioned the lack of competition between firms regarding the similar fee structures that each of them provide. It's probably no coincidence that that's the case, given that we have guidelines from the Department of Justice, and we can easily see them on the gov.uk website as to what are appropriate hourly rates in London and nationally, depending on what level of fee earner you are. So would you share with me that the competition or the lack of competition in hourly rates charged is probably not necessarily a a bad thing or a negative issue, given that we've got these guidelines coming from the centre in any event?
Thank you. I think we've got your question. And then, Chris, do you want to answer that?
I agree with you on the first
questions together.
The first comment you made. I entirely agree with you. No more to say. I don't agree with you on the second point because I think they don't give a damn about those guidelines. It's completely irrelevant to them. They simply go on market economy. You know, £1,000 an hour now is routine in the city. You go into the barrister's profession. Lord Panic, who's the Lionel Messi of the profession, apparently is on 6,000 an hour for revising Man City at the moment, which works out at 12 million.
And more than that for revising Boris Johnson, probably.
Yes. So the economy, I think, doesn't pay any regard to the guidance above a certain level.
Chris, I'm going to take the two questions. One thing I want to, you read out a list of suffering in the legal profession by young people. Are you able to ask to identify how many hours those young people are meant to be working in order to live
Yes.
on profits?
The larger firms expect 2,250 hours per annum, of which something like 1,700 is chargeable. But many, I mean, I spoke to a lawyer in a Cardiff law in an international law firm the other day whose chargeable target was 10 hours a day.
10 hours a day. Okay. And we've got two questions here. Can I ask you both to ask your question? I'll get Chris to answer you both together, if that's all right.
Yeah. Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. My name's Rachel Leighton. I'm the head of widening participation here at Cardiff Uni, and we have our Sutton Trust Pathways to Law programme, which encourages young people from underrepresented backgrounds to take on a career in law. I guess I'm just wondering if we're kind of referencing burnout and stress levels of kind of 92% in the profession. I'm just wondering, you know, reflecting on your own career, would you still encourage young people to pursue a career in law, you know, given that statistic? And if so, why?
We take the other one as well, and then you can answer both together, if that's right.
Hi, I'm Dr. Hanan Abu Salem, expert in international law. Prior to COVID, while I was a student at Cardiff University, I decided to launch Virtual Justice Limited to make justice accessible and affordable to all. And in my business plan, I could see that it would actually be very, very profitable as a business. And now I know why no one wanted to invest in the business, because they're assuming a people-orientated law firm would not be profitable. Then COVID hit, and I joined a conference in America via Zoom for 3 days, and all the lawyers were saying the brick and mortar model was leading them to self-destruction. They were losing money. They were not able to connect with clients. And one single mother who had a small firm decided to shut down her business, brick and mortar, work online, and she was very profitable by also reducing her prices. So for me, she was the perfect example that I was right. But my question is now this: with commercial law firms, I can see that they spend a lot of money, for example, on allowing their employers to go and volunteer and then they pay them, or on buying the recyclable items, or on their amazing offices, or looking like they're supporting some kind of social justice, charitable causes. And I know it helps their brand, obviously. But why can they not see the profit in supporting individuals who have specific issues, like, for example, inheritance law? This is what I focus on in Virtual Justice, supporting women who can't get access to their inheritance in, not necessarily only in this country, but in other countries. And when they win their cases, then we can get their money, we can get the money that we need, because we know those cases will win. It's just that they're poor women who can't afford the legal fees upfront. So why not invest in that when the money is there? Why not cut costs where you don't actually need to pay them, and put them in the right place and make profit? And that's my question.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Chris.
So the first question, I get asked that question at least once a week. Every friend of mine who's got a child that wants to go in the legal profession says, would you say that? And the answer I give to them is, well, the first thing you say to you is, both of my sons said, I ain't doing that. That's hard work. That's absolutely true. But if they're clever enough, and if they've got an engine, you have to be very clever, and you need a big engine. You must not be afraid of hard work. It's a range, but if you've got the tools, do that. But if you don't have those raw tools, then I would go and do something else. Is the short answer. Lots of questions in there. In the inheritance tax thing, there's a business model in there that if there's a business model there, someone will take it, like the Good Law Project, like Client Earth. You can see inheritance for women as a business model on the basis that you'll get paid by the the success that you'll get in running it. But as to the other points that you make about, I mean, you touched on one thing I was going to mention, which is that all of the larger firms all have pro bono units of one type or another. A really good friend of one of my sons runs the pro bono unit in one of the big firms. Those pro bonos are brilliant, but you must remember that they are there to put lipstick on the business, not to be the business. We don't do that. We don't have a pro bono unit because I think it is, well, we train all our colleagues to do that. They are not skilled up to do that. What we do is we believe we're part of a community, and virtually everyone in our firm is a trustee or a chair, a director of not-for-profit organisations of all types. You can think somewhere in Cardiff, one of us is somewhere in there, which we're quite good at doing. That's our way of integrating. But the whole idea of how profitable law firms support, I don't think that you're going to change that model to fix the problem. The problem has to get fixed another way.
Okay, well, I'd just like to end the session now by thanking Chris for what he's brought to us today. I think he's opened up a whole series of questions for many of us, and potentially areas of academic study as well, Chris. So I'm warning you, you're probably going to be besieged with people now about questions around a whole series of issues related to certainly our public value ethos, but that includes the issue of decent work, which you've really opened up in a big way today. But I know some of my colleagues are looking at things like toxic working environments, and they may have questions for you as well. But I think it's been a real insight into the political economy of law, particularly here in the UK. And I really want us to now to thank Chris very much indeed for what he brought to us this morning. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. And just one final point from me. Do you love it? Do you enjoy?
Yeah, I love it.
He loves it. He loves it. Okay, so thanks so much, everyone, and see you again.